like a cup. Anyway, so last night went to the movies with the wife, then came home and watched a video of Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty. And there's a few videos talking about this, and I watched the whole hour and 43 minutes or whatever it was. And it was a good debate, discussion. I wouldn't necessarily call it debate, even though they disagreed on a few things and did get into a bit of a back and forth. But it was interesting, and I mean, I've known Matt Dillahunty. I've known about or watched Matt Dillahunty's stuff for years. Back in the day, I was like a atheist proselytizer, I guess. You know, I watched all the Atheist Experience. I watched a bunch of Thunderfoot videos. I watched, a whole bunch of different people who, as Jordan Peterson calls them, celebrity atheists. And I think he's in particular talking about Dawkins and Sam Harris. And anyway, the discussion is good. The discussion is good between the two of them, Peterson and Dillahunty, and it's worth watching. I encourage you to do it. If you can find it, 2 hours to watch it, then do so. Anyway, what was kind of frustrating for me is it's like the two of them are kind of in different worlds in how they view things. So, and they could never sort of see eye to eye, and they were kind of like talking past one another. Dillahunty would ask a question, Peterson would answer it in his, long-winded style, and very eloquent, very, very explanatory. But Dillahunty didn't seem to, come up with much of a response to that, apart from saying, I think I understood what you said, and then he would go on and talk about his own personal views, as opposed to asking follow-up questions in an attempt to understand. In that sense, Peterson was a little bit more engaged and would push Dillahunty for more detail. Some might even say to the point of annoyance. You would say he was kind of, Peterson even mentioned as I was torturing you there. And you could tell it was making Dillahunty a little bit uncomfortable, and he even accused Peterson of strawmanning his position. So I guess, here's the thing. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a god or gods. I don't discount the possibility of there might being a god or gods, but thus far I haven't seen any evidence in support of it. I also agree with Peterson that there is a religious tradition that underpins all of human civilization and our society. And what did he call it? A metaphorical substrate, I think is how he termed it. And I get it. I understand that basically it's a series of stories that modern human civilization and everybody preceding us have navigated the world and existed with one another based on this set of archetypal stories. And whether or not that lends credence to the idea of a supernatural being, an actual, creator God and interventionist God and sustainer God, as Dillahunty puts it, is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really, that's the question that was on Dillahunty's mind. What evidence do you have for it, and why should people believe in it? And I think he framed the question wrong, because he's looking at it as he wants physical evidence. He wants empirical evidence in a scientific context to support the belief in a God. And while Peterson tried to come up with that, or support that hypothesis, he's really talking about it in the context of myth and the importance of myth, the metaphorical substrate, as he put it, and how these things are necessary for a seemingly healthy or grounded society, grounded civilization. And he gets into these sort of spats with Dillahunty from time to time when he says, well, you say you're an atheist, but you're not really an atheist because and he's talked about Sam Harris in this sense too, you live a Christian life, or you live a life of a believer, in that you follow these moral guidelines that we all have, and these moral guidelines exist not as a naturally occurring behavior for humans, but rather because of a value system that is predicated on God belief, or belief in an external morality that is provided by something metaphysical. It's a little bit, he makes it even more heady than I'm saying, but, and I'm not sure I truck with that, because I can see Dillahunty's arguments for having a secular morality and having a societal system that is predicated on secular morality as opposed to religiously or traditionally inspired morality. Anyway, it was a really good discussion. Again, I encourage you to check it out. And there's a number of videos analyzing the discussion. A couple of things. In hearing Peterson talk about the metaphorical substrate, and to me, I take it he means the mythological foundations of all of our narratives and our archetypal stories. I can't help but be reminded of Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell did a video documentary series called The Power of Myth, and it was based on a book called The Power of Myth. And I'm sure that Peterson's aware of Joseph Campbell, and he may even have mentioned it in some of his discussions. There was another series that I thought was very interesting, and it sort of supports Dillahunty's position of developing a society based on laws and rules from a purely secular position, not purely secular, but from more humanistic, I guess, groundwork. And that's a series, a couple of series, I guess, by James Burke. James Burke is a BBC presenter, and in the 70s he did a couple of series. One was called The Day the Universe Changed, and the others were called Connections and Connections 2. Connections 2 is just, second season of Connections, the second series of Connections. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, the structure of it was a documentary style story or series where he would take a technological development, put it in the context of the historical setting of the time, and show how it changed everything going forward in, the larger civilization, larger society. And he concentrated mainly on Europe because he's English, and I think European history was sort of was the one doing all the forward movement in the time frames that he was talking about in terms of technological development, societal development. It was a time of colonization, so much was going on around the world as opposed to just in Europe, but it was all sort of hinged on European nations and European development. Anyway, when I watched that series initially, it sort of dawned on me that human development and the way humans interact and behave with one another can be associated with the idea that necessity is the mother of invention. That is, there was a need based on current situation in society at the time, and someone filled that need with a technological development or a a way of thinking or a way of looking at a problem and coming up with some solution to it. And the interactions between the different power players at the time, whether it be the clergy, the church, or it be royalty, or you know, the land barons, or you know, the what do you call it, the merchant class, or what have you, sort of draws a point of people behave and interact with one another because there's a need to, in order to achieve your own personal goals, in order your own personal happiness, and to have harmony and peace in your life. You need to work with one another, and in that sense, people can develop value systems and rules and a morality, if you will, or ethical behavior based on their own self-interest and based on the, you know, the axiom that it's better to get along than it is to, you know, fight with one another all the time. And I think that predates history and predates the mythology that Peterson likes to cite, because you can picture prehistoric peoples doing just that as an evolutionary strategy, an evolutionarily stable strategy. So even before the idea of myth, even before the idea of, or the concept of stories and supernatural, even, you know, when the human brain was so primitive that it didn't even have anything even approaching, you know, cognitive language, humans were a social animal, or early primates were a social animal, and so developed cooperative techniques. You see it in current primates, right? And they touched on that a little bit, just sort of tangentially. But in that sense, I think Dillahunty has a better sort of grasp of how a secular morality and a secular society can work. I don't think, however, that it deep sixes Peterson's argument that the foundation of our myths and the foundation of our metaphorical substrate are important to a stable society or stable civilization or stable population or even species. I think those things have value, and Dillahunty doesn't dispute that they have value. But his point, I guess, is it so valuable that we shouldn't do away with what it's all predicated on, which is belief in a supernatural being? And here's where I think it might be a controversial statement. I don't think even the believers out there, the ones who say they believe in God, actually support the notion of an interventionist sustainer God. Not a lot of them, anyway. I think most of them realize that that is a bygone sort of view of God. Most of them understand God as, maybe Peterson puts it, the ideal to aspire to. And he cites the Christ figure. That they talk about there's a specific phrase that Dillahunty uses that says, you know, we have this society we do now because we stood on the backs of giants. You know, everybody who came before us and developed these systems and developed this understanding and philosophy that leads us to living a productive and harmonious life in a civilizational context, we do it on the backs of giants, the people who came before us. Peterson chimed in, and this was during the Q&A period, and said, yes, and the Christ or the God is the meta-giant upon which those giants stand on. So this is, I think, a bone of contention that they're never going to see eye to eye on. And what it comes down to is Peterson believes that the myth and the belief in the supernatural being underpins everything we've done in terms of developing as a civilization and developing as a people and a species. Dillahunty doesn't. And Dillahunty sees it as these things would have come about anyway. Given that we try things out and we find out what works and we adopt the things that work and we discard the things that don't. It's really a question of memetics, right? Anyway, please watch the video. It's really worth sitting around and like listen to what they're saying and try and get past the needling back and forth, and some of the comments from Peterson that seems flippant, and the audience listens to him, oh, that's just ridiculous. But he's looking at it from like, let's talk about it from a philosophical point of view. And I can see a lot of people taking some of the contents and comments that Peterson makes out of context and saying, look, he's making these silly arguments that Ray Comfort would make. Well, he's not, because he's looking at it in a broader philosophical sense, and he wants to get to the heart of the matter, as opposed to Comfort, who simply just wants to dismantle his opponent. And anyway, I'm going on and on about it. I'm actually giving away too many spoilers about it. If you haven't watched it, please watch it. It was a really interesting video, and definitely worth the time. And if you like Dillahunty and you like Peterson, you won't be disappointed. Anyway, thanks very much. Talk to you later.